Sir, Mr. Chair, thank you.
Honourable Leanne Dale-Zeal.
Mr. Chairman, I wanted to respond to something the Minister said, because I think he may have misunderstood my concern about the legislation. And as I say, I'm not an expert on this particular bill, because this bill, as he's pointed out, went to a select committee that I wasn't a part of. So I haven't had the opportunity, like Phil Twyford, to hear all the submissions, and I think he's given quite a good enunciation of the concerns that have been raised at the select committee. But there is nobody believes for 1 minute that the fact that the council has been overseeing the work of a particular the work that's been undertaken under a permit guarantees a particular outcome. And in fact, I started my contribution by quoting from an email that I had received, and this guy previously was in the building control section of one of the district councils, and I'm not going to mention which one it is, because I think it would be unfair to do so without obviously exciting some sort of response, because what he's reported is training sessions where they are taken out to see work sites that are in progress so that they can learn how to be control inspectors, and not pointing out to the person in charge of the building site that they're not complying with the code. And this guy's obviously had a lot of experience as he's got a background in carpentry, and the people that were working with him in this particular district council had no previous experience in the building industry. So they had no formal qualifications in the building industry. So this is going back a wee way, because things may have changed obviously since then. But the point that he was making was that he had no background in inspection, but he did at least have a carpentry background. And what he was finding out was that nobody was pointing out to people on the site obvious breaches of the code. And he realised it was because these people didn't know they were breaching the code. And it was rotten to the core, just like our leaky buildings. And he was making the point that basically that he was seeing non-compliance being left unrectified by building inspectors on a day-by-day basis. And he was saying that this is a disaster waiting to happen in somebody's life, no matter how small. And that was the point that I was making. It's not that the supervision is in itself a guarantee of a particular outcome, because I too have read the Department of Building and Housing's report into the CDV collapse, and I think that the inquiry, when it comes up on, I think it starts in June, the CTV building at the Royal Commission, I think that's going to expose a lot of things that were wrong, and perhaps may even go further than the Department of Building Housing report, given some of the stuff that I've seen. I should also mention that I was the Minister of Commerce who received the original open letter from John Scarry when he was expressing to all of Parliament the concern that he had, and to the industry, around the structural engineering profession and construction industry in New Zealand. And I heard the Minister's comments on television the other night saying that nobody agrees with him. Well, can I just say that I've got a copy of the IPEN's report in response to John Scarry's concerns, and also I've got a copy of the additional report that was done for the Department of Building and Housing at the time, and there were genuine concerns that he raised, and it was believed that the Building Act itself in 2004 would actually address the problems that he raised. And what I'm telling this House now is that it hasn't. The Building Act 2004 has not addressed the concerns that he raised in 2002. And there are some buildings in this city I wouldn't walk in because of the concerns that I believe he is justifiably raising in terms of earthquake risk and what would happen in those buildings. I just want to make the point around the responsibilities of a designer, and that's Clause 14D. And it talks about a designer, meaning a person who prepares plans and specification, and they have to be responsible for ensuring that the plans and specifications or the advice in question are sufficient to result in the building work complying with the building code. This was one of the issues that came up in the 2002 report, and that is that there is, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, there's no continuing oversight. Often in the circumstances, there's no continuing oversight given, and I think if he looks at the IPEN's report in response to the John Scarry concerns, what they identify is that there is a pushing down of the pricing to the extent that the the real estate agent that sells the commercial building after it's sold is likely to get paid 20 times what the structural engineer will be paid, and so they're not paid to supervise. And so the definition, the responsibilities of a designer are just to prepare the plans and specification to code, and then ensuring that the plans and specification are sufficient to result in the building work complying with the code if the building work were properly completed in accordance with those plans and specifications or that advice. And I think you'll find that with the CTV building and others, it's actually the capacity to go back and keep an eye on what they're actually doing, because you can write the plans and then you'll find that what they'll do is they'll actually order a different product than the one that was specified in the design. And who's responsible for that? Actually, nobody here, as long as it's within the code. But it may well be that there are certain features that are not being complied with, and as a result you end up with extremely dangerous buildings. And these issues were raised with the standard 500E wire, which I don't have the full details of, but it's just an example. There are plenty of other examples of where you can write the plans and specifications for building work. You can give advice on compliance of the building work with the building code. You can be responsible for ensuring that this plan is sufficient to result in building work complying with the building code, but you can't actually know whether in fact what they do on the site, what they do off the site, because off-site inspections for some of the precast concrete solutions are not subject to the same supervision that an on-site arrangement would entail. So there are so many issues in here that I'm just very fearful that we pass legislation without taking into account all of the need to make sure that we get this right, because so many people are going to be relying on us, and it's actually too late, you know, when the building collapses and people, you know, people's lives are lost, and then there are people who essentially have to front up to an inquiry to admit their culpability in that regard. And I think the engineer that spoke at the building inquiry the other day and who broke down, I think he did much more for giving people confidence in the engineering profession than just about anyone else, because I think the public reacted to the humanity of his response. And what I'm saying is that we are responsible as politicians to get the legislative framework right, and we've all accepted that the 1991 framework was wrong. We've been told that there were problems before the 2004 Act came in. We've now, most recently, been told by the same person who warned us in 2002 that the 2004 Act isn't delivering, and we're warned by him again that this legislation is part of a piecemeal package that won't deliver. And I'm worried that we are not listening to the right people, because, and I want to just end with this comment, there are lots of people out there who agree with John Scarry, but not all of them have got the ability to speak out, because some of their work is entirely dependent on them not speaking out. But I have spoken to engineers around this country who support what he says, and we treat him lightly I believe to the great detriment not only of ourselves as representatives of the people, but also as people with some responsibility for the quality of our buildings and the health and safety of those who use them. So, Mr. Chairman, I want to reiterate my plea to the Minister to hold back from this bill.
Speaker.
Andrew Williams.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to rise again to respond to some of the comments of the Minister